Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Delara. This episode is once again brought to you by our good friends at Props.Cash. You know them, the red charts, the green charts, the hit rates, the projections, it's all in there. And with the NCAA tournament starting, you can get college player prop tool and the NBA player prop tool for the rest of the season with the second half pass. Use code CASHTHATNBA for $69. Just a nice price. $69 for the rest of the season. You have all of that at your fingertips, both on your computer, both in your phone. You're going to want that because there's going to be games nonstop starting this week, just throughout the rest of the summer, pretty much, or the rest of the spring into the summer, between the college games and the NBA games. And you are going to want to have the absolute best access for that. And when we're thinking about the playoffs, I know that not every team makes the NBA playoffs, obviously. Props.Cash has one of the best filters in the market. You can just click regular season or you can click on playoffs. And it makes a huge difference when you're capping just because you have that differentiation. And so you can see a little bit of how different players are used at different times of the year and how their hit rate kind of changes on some of these prop numbers. And you can get that all for the nice price of $69 with code CASHTHATNBA. And you'll also be entered in to win a free annual pass for all the sports. Guys, I don't have producer Corey with me. He's on trial. I'm on trial. We're not going to say anything about the fact that I'm on trial and he's on trial and I'm here, but, it is what it is. But I did have to bring in a heavy hitter here for the NCAA tournament. The dude knows ball. You guys know him. We've got Brandon Anderson here of the Action Network. Brandon, how are you doing? It's good to have you back. It's been a while since we talked about contracts.
Yeah, it has been. I forgot that was the last time we had our 4-part money series. It's been a minute since then. It's been a minute since I've even been on a podcast with working internet. My last was out of the dungeon in North Dakota a few times. So I got the studio lighting back again now. I got my bracket shirt on. I got my good microphone. I have actual internet here in Chicagoland. So yeah, I know probably even Joe, some of your listeners, I know you shared a couple of times about my family. I was home with my family. My mom had open heart surgery. Surgery went well, and she's still working on recovery. It's just kind of a long road ahead, but we're about a month out from that. We have hopefully our last appointment tomorrow with the heart surgeon in a good way. So moving forward from there. And so, yeah, I know many of our followers are the same, but I know you shared a few times too. So thank you to listeners who contributed to funds that were given, contributed, just good thoughts and prayers and everything. So yeah, that has gone well and is a long road ahead still. I am back now, ready to buckle in, strap in, buckle up.
Buckle up, yeah.
Yeah, get the
Buckle
whole
up.
thing. I'm ready for basketball. So yeah, I got back like a week before all the basketball, settled in, watched like literally 100, 150 games last week probably to get ready for this. I got the double, the triple screen going. I'm watching first four. We saw Howard and Wagner. The Seahawks, Staten Island Seahawks, nearly blew it. And Howard had a huge comeback, our first play in game. And I turned it on just in time to see the last 2 minutes because ain't nobody care about 16 seed playing games.
No.
But Joe, we got just good basketball. We got good basketball that matters. The games matter. The NBA is coming to playoffs. I'm excited to actually be an NBA writer again. Yeah, I'm excited to talk some ball tonight.
No, it's going to be a good time. So for the listeners, what I want to give you a little bit of a roadmap for what we're going to do in this episode. We're going to talk about the NCAA tournament first. We are going to then talk about some of the NBA. We're going to talk. I'll give out a couple of my best bets, talk through them about the slate. There is a big game between the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics on Wednesday. And that's going to kind of lead into a bigger picture conversation about the NBA. I will give you one NBA best bet right now. I like Tyrese Halliburton over 10.5 assists against the Detroit Pistons. Pistons just not very good, but Halliburton's over this line in 7 of 13 games after the All-Star break. And since then, Detroit is 11th in pace, 19th in defensive rating. Indiana has actually slowed down like a hair. They're still 5th in pace, though. And in 3 games versus Detroit this season, he's averaging 13 assists on 20 potentials with 10, 16, and 13. And that 13 assist game was about a month ago, just kind of right out of the All-Star break. So I do like Tyrese Halliburton to go over the 10.5 assists in this game against the Detroit Pistons. But now transitioning into the NCAA, a lot of people, like we're filling out our brackets. Everybody kind of knows like how to fill out a bracket. Like just like, all right, like whatever, like fuck it. Like I'm gonna pick like a dog here. Like, all right, like I gotta get a 12 seed in. A 12 seed always wins. Like, there's certain trends that like always kind of pop. And I know not only are you a trends better, but you're incredible in terms of like your analysis of what matters, like what in trying to sort through all of the data and saying like this stat matters, this stat doesn't matter. But one thing that I did want to talk to you about is a lot of times like we're looking for like a Cinderella or an underdog or something like that. And when we're filling out brackets, I think that it matters from like a game theory perspective, right? Like if you're in a smaller pool, you should have a completely different strategy than you should if you are in a bigger pool.
Yep.
And those are all kind of things that matter. One question that I had for you though is because I know like we're always looking for that like underdog or that Cinderella team. Do you think that it's better to put the Cinderella team like in your bracket trying to call it? Or do you think it's better to actually, now that you have so many betting options at your fingertips, is it better to take a little bit of a safer route on the bracket and actually just go and bet on that team to maybe make the Sweet 16, pull off the first round upset, maybe make the Elite Eight? What do you think? How would you handle it if it's kind of like your bracket, just in like, if you're in like your office pool or your family pool?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is the setting matters here. It's similar to like when you play fantasy sports. People text me like, all right, who should I get in my fantasy league this year? It's like, all right, well, you can't just ask me that question. What's the scoring? How many running backs? How many receivers? Are you doing 2 quarterbacks or 1? Is it tight end premium? Like all that stuff that if you're a good fantasy player, that stuff matters. I guess I probably should have done basketball for this, but like basketball, how many categories? Is it head to head or is it roto? Like, you wouldn't just do a fantasy draft without knowing that. It changes the whole thing. And I think with March Madness, is it a bracket? Is it a bet? Is it a small pool? Is it a big pool? Like all that stuff should shape the strategy. And really, I think because in most scenarios, people are going to overpick upsets in their bracket because that's March Madness. That's the fun. That's what we want to do. We all know they're coming, but like if I promised you there would be exactly one 12-5 upset, and that's what most people know. We know the 12-5. We know it's coming. Lately, 6-11 is actually even a little bit more common these days, kind of just the way that seeding is going now. But look, if I know there's exactly one 5-12 upset, then you might think to yourself, all right, well, I better pick one of those, right? Well, maybe. Or you just pick all 4 5s and you're guaranteed you got 3 of those points. And don't forget, 5 seeds are pretty good. 5 seeds might win again the next round against a 4 seed, or maybe a 13 if they got lucky. 5 seeds could beat a 1 seed, or even get to the Final Four. UConn was a 4 seed last year. They went all the way despite their seeding. So if you pick an upset, if you pick the wrong 12-5, even though you knew there was one of them, you didn't just get that one wrong. You now got a different 5-12 wrong, the one you didn't pick, and you now have a 12 seed in your next matchup when you should have had the favorite, and now you didn't have them going. Sometimes that also makes you be like, oh, well, this team actually wasn't very good. I just wanted that 5 seed out, so let's put the 4 seed through, and you didn't really think about that matchup. So, yeah, it matters to think through that stuff, and the reality is, first thing with the bracket, especially, I'm going to assume most people are in some sort of a bigger pool. If you're just in a smaller pool, like a lot of these rules don't matter. Yeah, like 50, 100, 1,000, whatever.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
The first thing is you should fill your bracket out inside out. And what I mean is you think you want to do matchups and you want to go one by one and you got to start in the first round or even in the play-ins and go all the way through. The problem is, you're going to be wrong. You're going to be wrong a lot of times. That's the fun of it. That's why we do it. And if you're wrong and you're like, well, I like this team because they're going to have a huge advantage on the boards and they're going to force turnovers. Well, that's great. If we get that matchup, you're probably right. But if you're wrong and that team lost earlier in the matchup, now you have a totally different matchup and you've made an analysis about a thing that's not existing anymore, where what you really should do is say, okay, let me kind of think of the possible paths. Let me consider the paths along the way, but who's my champ? Who's the team I'm going to bat with my bracket? That's my team. If they lose, I'm out. In all likelihood, if your champ goes out, you're out. You got to have that team there. You're ride or die. Okay, next, who's in my championship? Who's on the other side of the bracket? Who's in my Final Four? Like, start that direction. And you don't have to literally fill it out that direction, but you want to think about, okay, if I like UConn, if they're my champion, then I need to not just like UConn only in the path that I created in my bracket, but I have to imagine, well, what if they do have to play the dangerous team that I magically made upset so they don't have to play them? Oops, they might have to face them later. And what if
That
they
can be a
have to
problem.
face the 1 seed or the 2 seed?
Yeah.
So, yeah, like for in the Final Four, in the championship, you've got to kind of look, play the multiverse a little bit with your bracket. So start with the big stuff and then kind of fill them in all the way back out. You got UConn as your champ, we'll fill in 6 blanks because they had to win 6 games to get there, and then kind of work backwards. So that's one thing with brackets. And then if you're not sure about a game, this is a rule I kind of adopted for myself doing a bracket maybe 5-10 years ago, because I love the upsets. You know me, I love the
You
underdog.
love the
Want to
upset.
pick the upset. Yeah, it's me. This is why I love it. This is where I fell in love with the underdog, is March Madness. You love the upset pick. You want it on your bracket, right? You want to be the guy that called the 15 seed. Call the 15 seed with a bet. Put your bet in. Put your $10 on it.
Yep.
Get your 15 seed money line and profit. And don't put it on your bracket, because in all likelihood, you just knocked out a 2 seed that we both know is most likely going to win the game, even though you think the 15 has a better chance to win than is predicted. Both things can be true. And now your 2 seed didn't just cost you that game. They cost you in the Sweet 16 and maybe the Elite 8, and they might have gone to the Final Four, and now you're out of your bracket because somebody else got points in all those spots that you sacrificed right away. So to me, a good rule of thumb, if I'm not really pretty confident that my upset is going to happen, I'm probably just going to always default to the better team.
Yeah.
Like, at least,
go ahead.
at least if I go down, I'm taking you down with me, Joe. Like, if my pick is wrong, at least I had the 1 seed, and you probably did too, and so did they, and I didn't really believe in them, but at least we all lost together, rather than I took my swing, I didn't really believe in it, I didn't like the 1 seed, oops, I was wrong. Now everyone else in my pool is getting big points. So to me, those are the big strategies.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because it's like, if you are like trying to make those predictions, like you're really betting on multiple things happening, not just the one pick in a bracket, because it's changing like the entire dynamics of your bracket. Whereas like if you want to pick like one of those big upsets in the first round, like I don't know how much your pools are. A lot of brackets are like, if you're doing like an office pool or like any pool, they're like 25, maybe $50. Some of them are like 5 or 10. Like you could literally make that like back like exponentially if you just bet the same thing on that one pick, because that's gonna, like, realistically, like if you were gonna do that with your bracket, the odds that like your 15 seed makes it far is definitely, it's terrible. Not only is it terrible, but like you could get way better return on like the expected value of just betting on the money line is going to be way higher than like basically fucking up your whole bracket because you were like, I want to call a 15 seed. So those are kind of all considerations to make. And then there's also like the thought of leverage. So I think that like once you, and this is especially a bigger thing in bigger pools, where you don't always want to have to pick underdogs. Like in theory, I think like the most likely scenario, I guess, like if you really had to do the probabilities, would be like, in theory, the most likely scenario is that every favorite would win, right? I get that that's not really like the way that this works, but like I think like in theory, like the way that the betting odds would work and like the way the probability would be, it's still unlikely for that to happen, because having that type of event happen every time is unlikely. But in theory, taking all the favorites would be the most likely scenario, right? Like in a vacuum. But when you're in a pool with everybody, like you have to differentiate yourself to a degree, because if you're especially if you're picking like a UConn, for example, UConn's the favorite. UConn is probably going to be one of the highest picked teams to be at the top of the championship, to win the trophy, to win the national championship. If you're a UConn team, you got to do something funky a little bit to differentiate yourself, because it's a zero-sum game. Like there are like, maybe your bracket pays like 3 people at most, but it's like if you have a very common or like a chalky bracket, that means that like you probably are going to have a lot of the same things as other people. So what do you do, or like what are your thoughts in terms of
Yeah.
leverage to try to like make your bracket different without being bad?
Yeah, that's a good way to start this out because yeah, I'll just say up front, I think I'm quite confident UConn is the best team in the field. I actually don't think it's even really that close. I think UConn is clearly the best team in the field, not quite the way that South Carolina is clearly the best team in the women's field. Like they are clearly the best, and the odds for them are wild. But if if this was an NBA style playoffs, even if we had best of five, not best of seven, if we had best of five every round, I'm just all in UConn. I'm done. I'm betting UConn. I'm putting UConn in my bracket. UConn is winning the tournament. But it's not. It's not best of five. It's one. That's why they call it March Madness. So now I have to say, okay, I still think UConn should win the tournament. I still think they're the best team. I still have a hard time imagining more than honestly like three or four teams that could even possibly beat UConn. However, the numbers don't lie. We haven't had a defending champion make it past the Sweet 16 in almost 2 decades. We haven't had the number one overall one seed win the championship in over a decade. I promise you, if your pool has more than 50 people, as somebody that does by hand my brackets every year with all my like 200 friends and everything, I'll tell you right now, team in the top left corner is going to be your number one most leveraged pick in the finals. Like the more people are going to have UConn winning than anyone else. It could be, you could put Yemen as number one up in the top left corner. They would still be the champ that people would pick more than anyone else. That's how brackets go. People start there. They see number one. It's who everybody's talking about. It's who's getting picked. So if you pick UConn as your champ, good luck. Because now that like weird sleeper you picked in your Elite Eight, and you were like, you know what? I really like 10 seed Nevada in my Elite Eight. That'll just be a fun sleeper. Nope. Guess what? That decided your entire pool now because there were so many other UConn brackets so similar to yours that the only thing that distinguished you was your 10 seed Nevada Elite Eight pick. That's the leverage that you chose to beat the other UConn brackets because that's the pool. You got to play the field. So though I absolutely think UConn is the right pick and the best pick and the most likely champion, number one, I'm not betting them. I don't think the number is good. I don't think it's the right time to bet it. I think you missed the chance. You might get a chance later. I'm not betting it now. Just like that, as a bettor, you know sometimes the favorite is the favorite, but we don't bet the favorite always if the number is not good. In bracket pools, the number is not good. So number one, I'm not picking UConn even though they are the favorite. And number two, for me with a bracket, my usual strategy most years is I think, okay, I can pretty much guess who the top like 5 most likely champion picks are from people, right?
Yeah.
Usually it's going to be the top left is number one, the top right is number two, so the other one seed Houston this time.
Yeah.
Usually the bottom right. And then after that it starts to get funky. You're probably going to get like a Duke, Kentucky, Carolina, like some of the popular schools in there.
Yeah, like one of the popular schools.
Right. Like we know who the popular picks are going to be in your pool. You might know like, oh, well, I'm in Pennsylvania. So like Villanova is going to always be my number one pick. Like, you know who the team is that's going to be. My goal usually is to find a team that's not in that top 5, but is like 6, 7, 8 most likely. And if my pool's 70 people, let me compete against 4. Who are my 4 people that are picking, Iowa State, 2 seed that I like a lot. And if that's my team, now I'm ride or die Iowa State. And now, as long as they win, I just got to beat 2 or 3 other schmucks out there with their bracket. And I know I can beat 2 or 3 other schmucks, and I'm not going to have to worry about my stupid Nevada Elite Eight pick. I'm just going to ride Iowa State all the way. And if I'm right, I'm right. I win. If not, I'm out. And even there, don't go crazy because, again, you can bet. If you're like, well, my champion is going to be this 8 seed. I'm picking Mississippi State as my champ. Well, congrats. You're going to win your pool if you're right. Just put your $5 on Mississippi State to win the title as a betting slip. Do that instead. This is a betting podcast. Win your money that way. Play your pool differently. So, yeah, I think that's the leverage conversation. And it feels like that's a pretty good springboard for us into the regions here. Should we get into the East region?
Yeah, talk to me about the East. This is obviously going to be an interesting bracket. I feel like the committee made some decisions here in this East part of the region. What do you think about this? Because obviously UConn, I feel like UConn kind of got a tough draw for as a 1 seed. As good as they are, and I think that kind of helps with some of the leverage conversation. What do you think about the East bracket, like kind of as a whole? And obviously, I know that you kind of think that UConn should come out of the bracket, but if UConn doesn't come out, who is coming out of this bracket?
Yeah, so definitely when this region got announced, it was the first one because it was the one overall seed, and the outrage was justified. I was like, what? We're picking the conference champ from the Big 12, and we're picking the conference champ from the SEC, and we're putting Florida Atlantic, who was in the Final Four last year. Like this region is loaded. As I dug into it a little bit more, I'm gonna start in the bottom half of the bracket here. I'm out on the 2 and the 3 seeds. I'm out on Iowa State and I'm out on Illinois. So part of that is the profile. Iowa State, one of my big red flags for a high seeded team. And I know this seems kind of weird, but Iowa State was completely unranked in the preseason. Iowa State had 0 votes from anybody in the AP poll. They only had 2 votes in the coaches poll. In the last, where are we at on this stat? I'm not sure. Okay, here's the stat. 36 teams in history have been a top 2 seed. They started the year unranked in the AP poll. They finished in the top 10. That's Iowa State. Iowa State's had a magnificent year. Out of those 36 teams, not one of them made the Final Four, including out of those 36, 23 of them were 2 seeds like Iowa State. 15 out of those 23 that started unranked, finished top 10, and then are a 2 seed. 15 out of 23 lost opening weekend. So they got upset right away, 2-15, or they lost to a 7 or a 10. I like in this region, I wrote an article at Action Network about my favorite sleepers that can make a run. My favorite sleeper, even before the bracket came out, was the Drake Bulldogs. I love me some Missouri Valley Conference teams. I love picking them every year. Missouri Valley, if you look back, has upset after upset after upset. Even though they usually get kind of middling seeds like this, Drake is a 10 seed. Missouri Valley won 9 straight first-round games at one point the last decade. They, I think, have beaten 8 top 3 seeds this century. There's like Ali Farokhmanesh had the UNI shot over Kansas. Wichita State had a big run. Like there just are oodles of MVC teams. So I love Drake over Washington State in the first round. And I love the matchup for Drake against Iowa State. They're not going to turn it over. That's an Iowa State staple. And I think Drake can score even on good Iowa State defense. So I like Drake there. Illinois, I'm not quite as out on them, but I actually think BYU is a little bit underrated. They're a little bit underseeded. So if you don't know this about BYU, obviously we know their religious capacity. BYU can't play on Sundays, right? So because of that, I think BYU, they only had half the bracket they could be in, and they had to be in a certain matchup. I think they ended up getting underseeded. I think that they probably should have been a 5, could have even been a 4 maybe. And I think we're getting a bargain 6 seed here because of the religious stuff, because of the way their scheduling had to go. Yeah, and BYU is a team that I've never backed, but they're in the Big 12 this year. Conference matters. Normally I don't back them because they're in a bad conference where teams don't succeed at. Big 12 teams do well. I think BYU can kind of bully ball a little bit. They can hit threes. So in my bottom half of the bracket, I like BYU and I like Drake. That's probably teams playing to get into my Elite 8, which kind of sets up the top half of the bracket. So what do you think about either BYU or Drake?
Yeah, I do like both of those options. I know it's hard to bet against Moorhead, but I think we can go with the religious people at BYU here. I do know I saw like some trend about Duquesne playing a little bit slow. So like I know the spread is at like 9.5. I think that's always so interesting because like when teams play in like different conferences, it kind of changes like the way that these games kind of happen. And I think that when we're looking at this, at least in this conversation, a lot of it's really just like, is this team going to advance? Not necessarily like, is this team going to
Yeah.
cover? So I think that that's like always interesting. But I do think that your analysis on the bottom half of the bracket makes a lot of sense when you're saying like, all right, like the bottom half is like kind of weak, or there are some spots where we can maybe, poke around and it's like, all right, like I think a team like BYU, who I think is underseeded, could kind of could make a path through. And I think that point that you're kind of getting at with the seeding is interesting, because we're going to pivot to the top half of the East bracket in a second. But when you're looking at this, it's not like 4 seeds or like 3 seeds are like significantly worse than the 1 seeds. The 1 seeds are obviously like the best teams in the country. But talk to me about, like, when you look at it, people are like, a lot of times I think people will go and just say like, all right, well, like the 8 or the 9 just probably gonna get smoked by the 1. But I feel like it's not like as simple as that. Talk to me about the top half, because I think that's kind of where you see these bigger matchups.
Yeah, I think really, if you're looking at for most teams in the bracket, the difference from a 1 to a 4 to an 8 is not necessarily ceiling, it's floor, and it's consistency, especially. That 8 or 9 seed in many cases absolutely can beat a 1 seed. In fact, a lot of times the 8 or the 9s, like Florida Atlantic is a great example here. Florida Atlantic could have been left out of the bracket. Like, they do not have a great profile. Florida Atlantic also beat Arizona and has looked really good at times, and brought back a bunch of the guys from a Final Four team last year that could have been in the championship game. So Florida Atlantic is a huge wide range of outcomes. I commented on Twitter, oh man, UConn can't be happy possibly having to play Florida Atlantic in the second round. Well, that's true, but Florida Atlantic might not even make the second round, because Northwestern is going to grind it out. They're going to play slow. They're going to play smart. And Florida Atlantic kind of like plays loose and fancy free, and they make a lot of mistakes, and that's why they almost missed the tournament, and they might even get a chance to play UConn. So I think the seeding is about, okay, UConn's a 1 seed. Well, UConn's not a good example. Their ceiling is probably a little bit higher, but like North Carolina is a 1 seed, not because they're way better than the other teams, but because they took care of business, right? They won the games, and the underlying metrics and profile aren't quite as strong. I think North Carolina is clearly the worst 1 seed. We'll get back to them. But the difference from 1 to 4 to 8 is not, can you beat us any given day? Now, you can win. Like, parity is real. But can you do it 5 out of 7 times? UConn and Carolina, they're winning 5, 6, 7 games out of those 7. The 8 seeds are going to lose a bunch. The 4 seeds are going to lose a couple times along the way. So really, even 2. It's not that I don't like Iowa State or I don't like Illinois. It's, I think Drake and BYU are just as good, just as competitive, and can hold their own. Top half of the bracket here, I think, is one of your key decisions in the entire bracket. We've said everything there is about UConn. They're awesome. I honestly think they play like a pro team. The way that they run their offense, the way that they just get bodies flying at you on defense. UConn's awesome. I think Auburn is the single biggest, most underseeded team in the bracket. Auburn is the only team in the bracket by KenPom that's top 10 on adjusted offense and defense. Think about that. For all the 1 seeds and 2s and 3 seeds, we made Auburn a 4 seed, even though they're the only team in the nation that's top 10 offense and defense. You're going to see a lot of like KenPom metrics. These 8 teams qualify for a champion, or by this metric or this criteria, or all the champions. Guess what? And every single list you look at, Auburn is on the list.
Yeah.
And Auburn's odds are deflated in the betting market because they're in UConn's little sub-region, not just quadrant. They're like in the top half of the quadrant with them.
Yeah.
I think Auburn, from a betting standpoint, like Auburn can go toe-to-toe with UConn. UConn's better. UConn should win. But I think they're pretty evenly matched. I think you play that game, Auburn has a 40 to 45% chance to win, which means they're going to be underpriced in the market head to head. And also, back to leverage, in your bracket, everybody's going to have UConn. Everyone's going to have them going at least to that game. Most people are going to have them to the Final Four because they're that good. They deserve, in theory, to be there, right?
Yeah.
But you can, if you're confident, if you want to take a swing, or if you're not really in on UConn, Auburn is a great swing, a great pivot to be like, okay, here's my shot. And guess what? If you pick them over UConn, you might have to pick them another game or 2 or 3 after that. You want that betting ticket for Auburn Final Four. I think they have a chance to go further than that. Bruce Pearl has them playing awesome defense, going to give them a chance in a game, then go on big runs and put teams away. They are a lot of what UConn is. UConn's a little better, but not a lot better, not by as much better as the market or as many people in your brackets. So I think the top left is the spot where history says teams don't repeat, teams don't show up from the number 1 overall seed. I know it seems impossible. We do this every single year. We know who the top team is, and then they don't do it. I think Auburn, I think BYU and Drake, those are teams in the East region that you can immediately distinguish yourself from your bracket. And if it's UConn, so be it. You're probably going to lose anyways if it's UConn because everyone else picked them. So take a chance. I think one of those 3 teams is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think the point that you're making too is like if you take out UConn earlier too, like it's like, look, if you don't have UConn winning the tournament anyway, like if you take them out earlier, now you really have a chance to differentiate yourself. Maybe if you did pick like a team, even like let's just say like an Arizona or something like that, like if you picked one of those teams like on the other side of the bracket or a different part of the bracket, maybe that like helps you get there because you don't like you kind of got rid of a team, you have more opportunity to get something right later. But all right, so you have. Right now, you would have Auburn potentially coming out of the East. Let's take a look at the West part of the bracket. What do you think about the West? I know UNC, you kind of mentioned, they're the 1 seed in this bracket. Looking at this, I always love the Grand Canyon Antelopes. It's like one of my favorite teams to bet on. I don't know why. It just kind of is. It's them and the Gauchos. I love those guys. But what do you think about the Western part of the bracket? Who is your sleeper? Like, who are you buying here? And who do you think comes out of this part of the bracket?
Yeah, so I think that this is, in theory, probably the most wide open bracket. We've got the weakest 1 seed by a wide margin. I don't think Carolina should be a 1 seed. If you change the name on their jerseys, I don't think they are a 1 seed. They're not a bad team. They're probably a 2. They're probably a low 2 seed, to be honest. They could have even been a 3 seed. I think they're 9th in KenPom. They're a fine team. In my article, I talk about North Carolina as a 1 seed as one of the safest bets in basketball. Historically speaking, that's true. Historically speaking, they have Roy Williams as a head coach and a very different looking team. I'm not necessarily sure after digging into the profile that we should think that about this team. I think UNC could possibly lose in the second round right away to Michigan State. Tom Izzo, I know Michigan State has not been good all year long. Tom Izzo, when you have only a day to prep in what I call even numbered rounds. So like second round to get to the Final Four. In those games, Tom Izzo is insane. His record is off the charts. I don't have the stat for you. You can check the article. But like the man almost never loses. And it is routinely, year after year, in my bracket. If I can pick Michigan State once, and they are not necessarily locked to beat Mississippi State. Michigan State lost to a lot of teams this year. But Michigan State, remember I talked about preseason rankings? They're a 9 seed right now. They were top 5 in the preseason rankings in both rankings. This is a team that didn't live up to billing, but ironically, if you remember, UNC a couple of years ago, they were in that 8-9 game. They made the run, right? They beat Baylor in the second round, knocked off the 1 seed, and they made it all the way. They even should have won the championship. They blew it in the second half. They took out Duke. They lost to Kansas at the end. I don't think Michigan State's going that far, but they're set up similarly as a team that disappointed all year, but has a great coach, has a good setup, has good players. Like the preseason rankings matter because we knew what we thought coming into the year. And that doesn't necessarily mean it held, but that stuff matters. So I think Michigan State is a good sleeper. I think they are a team not necessarily that you want to pick in your bracket because that's an early spot. And if you're wrong, you've lost a lot of North Carolina points. But in a league where you can get a bracket where you get bonuses for upset long seeds, or if you just want to bet on them, I think that's a team there. Both of those teams, I think UNC against either MSU team in the second round, and screw them for putting that in those of us that have to grade brackets. We do not appreciate the double MSU.
Can't wait to film it out that way.
I know, right? Just put MSU, you're guaranteed a winner.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a close game in the second round that UNC will have every chance to lose. And if they win, I think they could lose to St. Mary's or to Alabama. And I think St. Mary's honestly could lose to Grand Canyon. That whole top half of the bracket, I just think there are a lot of quality teams, and it's a lot closer than the seedings would make you think. I
So I
think
have a
Michigan State absolutely could make the Elite Eight. I think Alabama or St. Mary's could do it. I think Grand Canyon potentially could get to the Sweet 16, your Antelopes, and my guy Bryce Drew. It's wide open to me. So the counter to that is the team I like in the bottom half is very clear to me. It's Arizona. I know Arizona has had the big upsets lately. They're the one team in this bracket that I really like. They have a complete profile. Their offense, their defense. They got guards that show up and are really good. You want that in March. And they are a team that can just beat you a lot of ways. They're a deep team. And to me, they're the one seed in this region. They
yeah.
probably would have been until the way the last week or two went out anyway. They're in the West. They get to stay out West the entire time. They're going to have a lot of fans out there. And I think this region really sets up well for Arizona. So they're my pick in the region. I do like New Mexico as another sleeper in that bottom half of the bracket. They eventually run into Arizona, but I think they can win a couple games before that. They're the 11th seed. I don't love Mountain West, but I just think New Mexico is pretty good. But yeah, to me, this is a region where Arizona is they're my clearest, surest Final Four pick out of any region to me.
So, given that you like, and we'll keep it quick and then move to the South, but given that you like Arizona, like, and you're certain on them, is this maybe the part of the bracket where you're like, I'm willing to take a chance, like on maybe like a Michigan State over a North Carolina or an Alabama over a North Carolina, because you don't really care who Arizona is playing later, because you're just like, look, like, I don't care. Like, give me anybody from the top half. Like, I like Arizona to come out of this. And then maybe that's the part of the bracket that you can get like a little bit funky with in terms of like trying to get a little bit of leverage.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, this is a spot where I have in my notes here. I think UNC could lose to Michigan State. I think they could lose to St. Mary's or Alabama. I think those would be all close-ish to coin flip games that they would have every chance to lose to. So if I think that, I'm not necessarily hurting myself so much by putting Michigan State over UNC, because I might have had UNC going out the next round anyway to whoever I had on St. Mary's or Alabama.
Yeah.
Now, the problem here is I don't feel confident about Bama versus St. Mary's. I don't even feel confident that St. Mary's beats Grand Canyon. So now I'm starting to like really short myself on options. And for me personally, when I end up where I'm like, I just don't really know who I like here, I'm probably going to default to chalk at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Just because at least if I go down, you go down too. But I do think this is a spot where if you want to go like, if I pick the way I want to pick the bracket, my Final Four in the West is probably 9 seed Michigan State against Alabama, and then Michigan State into the Elite Eight. And then I probably got 11 seed New Mexico against Arizona, and then Arizona beats New Mexico and Michigan State into the Final Four, which, hey, great. If I like Arizona anyways, and I get to play a 9 and 11 seed the last 2 games, all the better as far as I'm concerned.
For sure. So let's take a look at the South now. Houston is the 1 seed here. Marquette is the 2. What do you think about this? Obviously, you have your favorite team in the country, Duke, at the number 4. I'm going to change the question here. How early does Duke get knocked out of the tournament?
So literally over my shoulder right now, I have a book called Duke Sucks. Like, it's literally just a book called Duke Sucks that I have bought and given out to friends as well. That's what I think about this team. I regrettably must inform you that I think that this Duke team is actually like pretty good, and maybe even for once in our lifetime, slightly underseeded. I think that they are probably almost as good as UNC. They should not be a 1 to a 4 seed gap between them necessarily. UNC did sweep Duke, so they earned it. But to me, this region is simple in that I don't really love much of the underdogs, and I actually think that the top 4 seeds here are all pretty strong. So that's top half of the bracket is Houston and Duke. Bottom half of the bracket, Kentucky and Marquette. I don't love Marquette. I could see them going down to Florida or Colorado. I'll be watching that play-in closely. If Colorado wins, I might end up picking them over Florida and maybe over Marquette as well. Colorado's the 10 seed play-in. So that's the one Marquette that I'm not necessarily so in on. I'm worried about Tyler Kolek being healthy. Kentucky, I like them. They got great guards, but their defenses are horrendous. They're kind of like Alabama. They can score 100 but give up 110. Like, they're like the Pacers, basically. So they're going to be a lot of fun, but I don't know. You're going to have fun and then hate yourself rooting for your pick with them. Duke is Duke. Like, in a weird way, I think Duke actually isn't Duke this year. I think they're actually like a pretty high floor team that has never really quite hit a big ceiling. So I think that actually makes them somewhat safer. Houston, I think, is pretty definitively a top 3 team in the country. I always personally like to fade Kelvin Sampson a little bit. He's had a lot of big profile upsets, but the man has been at multiple Final Fours with different schools. Obviously, knows how to get it done. To me, I just have those 4. I have chalk: Houston, Duke, Kentucky, Marquette. My most likely, that's my 4 in the South. And I can pretty much talk myself in any direction there. I sort of prefer Duke over Houston straight up, but I love Houston against either Kentucky or Marquette if they get there. I probably just end up going total chalk in this region because I think these teams are relatively equal and I just don't want to sacrifice points too much. But to me, pick your favorite of those 4. I don't love the other options, and then just ride them to the finish line in that region. I'm probably not picking a champion out of this region because I'm too worried that they could lose in the 3rd round or the 4th round to these other options we're talking about, let alone after that. So
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm at. It's a bit of a toss up for me, but I like the 4 options. I just like them mostly evenly.
Okay, that's fair. And then looking at the Midwest, we have Purdue, who was famously upset last season. We also have Kansas, who they just broke the news a little bit earlier today that Kevin McCullough Jr., the leading scorer for the Jayhawks, is going to miss the NCAA tournament, and they're the 4 seed. What do you think about that in terms of this part of the bracket realistically? Because is Kansas a 4 seed with that information? Like, I guess the kind of the question I'm trying to get at is, do you think Kansas would have been a 4 seed had this news come out prior to Selection Sunday?
No, they definitely wouldn't have. Kevin McCullough is their most important player. He's a great defender. He's a likely first round NBA draft pick. Like if he was out, they wouldn't get the seed. But I don't think the seed was right anyway. Kansas, to me, already before this news, was the worst top 4 seed in the bracket. So of course, I only think that even more now. Like, to me, here's what happened. Kansas had a great non-conference. They were really good. They had a bunch of big wins. They were a 2 seed, and then conference play came, and they were good at home, and they were rough on the road, and they lost to some teams they shouldn't have, and they were probably like a 7 seed in conference play. And then the committee split the difference. It was like, average 2 and 7, 4 seed. You're Kansas. Great, here you go. And like, that's not how this works. Non-conference play was in December. I don't really care how you were then. It's not just McCullough. Hunter Dickinson, transfer from Michigan, has a shoulder injury. He's going to play, I'm sure, because especially now he's going to have to. For whatever reason, Kansas, like, of all schools, Kansas should be able to recruit anyone they want. They should have a deep roster. They should have any number of players. Kansas plays routinely year after year like 7 dudes, and that's it. So now they're down to 6. Hunter Dickinson has a shoulder injury that he's not going to be able to lift his arm very well to defend the rim, to get rebounds. He's their size. He's the guy, especially with McCullough out. So I can't fade Kansas hard enough or fast enough in this bracket, especially because in my sleepers article, 2 of my absolute favorite sleepers are right there in Kansas' little section. I love Samford, Buckyball. Samford plays like hockey line changes. Like, they send in 5 new guys and they're like full court pressing and running at you. That's not the team you want to face if you got 5 dudes that you can play the entire game with. So that's trouble. I like McNeese a lot also. They crank a ton of threes. Gonzaga, obviously, is the other favorite in that region. Gonzaga's good. Gonzaga's offense is really efficient. Honestly, if those 4 teams play like a round robin, I might still pick Kansas last. Like, I just don't see Kansas making noise out here. I think they could lose to Samford. I think they could lose. They definitely lose to Gonzaga. If Gonzaga lost to McNeese, which is possible because they're really good, I think McNeese could beat Kansas too. Here's the weird part. I don't know, Joe, if you gave out your Purdue ticket. I know you got the Purdue ticket. You had it before last. Did you give that on the pod to the people here?
I think I'm going to mention it. It was a while ago now, but I have a Purdue 30-1 ticket because we found out that I think I logged in the Action app because we knew that Zach Edey, based on some of the information we had, was like a projected 2nd round pick. But his agent had said if he wasn't going to be drafted in the 1st round, he was going to go back to school. And I was like, well, Purdue certainly will not be 30-1 if Zach Edey is back at school. And here we are, 1 seed, and I have a 30-1 CLV sandwich incoming on Purdue. Does Purdue, like, is my ticket dead, or like, can Purdue come out of this part of the bracket, or are we looking at like a Tennessee to really make some noise and make it to the Final Four?
So I've been razzing you all year long about your Purdue ticket because, like, look, we've seen what's been happening. It's not just last year, like you mentioned, casual, like, oh, they got upset last. No, they get upset every single year. They
All the
never
time.
win these top
Yeah.
games. But here's the thing: like, I'm not a Purdue. I'm a Purdue. That's who I have been my entire life. I cannot pick this team. I think this team is a little different. Number one, they play much faster. Normally, Purdue plays very slow. When you're looking at upsets, if you are the better team, you don't want to play slow. You want more possessions. That's more chances for you to be the better team. Purdue's playing much faster now. That makes them much less upset likely. So that's one thing. The defense is really good. We know Zach Edey is good. The second thing is they finally have a good guard this year. Braden Smith has been really good, stepped up. I think he's going to play through the injury just fine that he picked up. He actually, in some metrics, is like a top 5 player in the country by how he's like. Now it's playing with Edey, so it's helping. But Purdue is a top 5 3-point shooting team. They demolish on the boards, so that is going to give them extra possessions, more chances to be the better team. I still don't love that it's Purdue and all their history, but in this region, to me, because I'm out in Kansas, and even though I like McNeese and Samford, they would get throttled by Purdue. They'd be like a minus 30 on the glass because both those teams are small and don't rebound. It's not happening for them. So I don't love Tennessee or Creighton. I think Creighton has a pretty good profile, but historically, Purdue and Creighton and Tennessee are all teams I would look to avoid. But guess what? Here in the Midwest region, you got to pick one of them. Those are my 3. So I'm stuck with one of the 3. And of the options, Joe Delera, I think I'm picking Purdue to go to the Final Four. And I can't believe it because I have not been on this team. And I'll take it a step further. Remember, top right half, I don't know who I got coming out of there. Houston, Duke, Kentucky.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, let's play some game theory. Why would I pick I absolutely would pick Duke or Houston or Kentucky head to head over Purdue every time. Don't have to think about it. But if I don't know which one it's going to be and I have Purdue as my pretty clear Midwest Final Four, game theory now, I'm back to on the left side, Auburn and Arizona. I got a mess in the top right. I'm at Purdue down here. Oh my gosh, I think I just have to have Purdue losing in the championship game. And look, the Big Ten has not won a championship since Michigan State at the turn of the century, but they have frequently lost a championship. I think 7 times they've made it and lost. So I probably, by game theory, I've got 2 clear Final Four picks. I've got Arizona, I've got Purdue. So I think Arizona over Purdue is the bracket strategy that sets me up for success here. Arizona probably ends up like the 4th or 5th favorite, maybe 6th range. Carolina's popular. I can handle being not the highest leveraged pick. I think actually with Purdue, you're going to get a weird leverage spot where, kind of like Virginia a few years ago, people are so out on them. There's such an obvious fade because of the history that actually the pivot might be to go in on Purdue and say, hey, look, every metric we have says this is a top 3 team, like by margin. They are clearly, there is Zach Edey above the field. Yeah. So I can't tell you to pick Purdue to win the championship. I can't get there. It could happen, but I can't do it myself. I think Purdue, they've never had the Final Four in the modern era. I think this could be the spot. They have the right bracket here. I think things set up pretty nicely for them. Somebody I think is going to beat them eventually. But in the bracket, I think they're pretty good, relatively safe and smart pick because of the setup. So that's me on the Midwest. I can't believe I got there. I love being a Purdue for life, but I'm a Purdue for this bracket.
Hey, we love it. So you can get Arizona. They're in market at 14-1 to win the title. That's like roughly 4th, 5th favorite, depending on the book. So definitely shop that around. But it's going to be exciting, and definitely like some of the insights that you kind of were able to provide, I think are going to be super helpful for people trying to fill out their brackets. This episode's dropping late Tuesday, early Wednesday morning. So it's going to hit your like inboxes just in time. I want to pivot to the NBA for a little bit. Like I said, I hit you guys with the best bet earlier in the show. But we know this is an NBA podcast, but given like what's going on in the world right now, it was made a little bit more sense to talk about college basketball for a minute. One game that I did want to talk about is the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Boston Celtics. If I told you this game was happening preseason, what do you think the spread was going to be? Assuming health, like relative health.
Remind me, where is the game at?
It's in Boston.
in Boston before the season. I think we're looking at something around like -4 or -5 range would be my
All right.
guess.
So Boston has listed Drew Holiday shoulder as questionable and Jaylen Brown also as questionable. Milwaukee has listed Marjan Beauchamp as probable. Giannis hamstring is questionable. So this line has ballooned to -8.5 for Boston at home.
Wow.
It seems like a big number, right? When you're looking at these two teams, because these are like I get that the Cavs are good. Not really the point. I feel like nobody really believes in Cleveland based on like the redundancy that they have between, Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, Allen. Like they're good, but then it's weird because the numbers like kind of indicate that they're better when they're split, and like you're not going to split them because they're your best four, whatever. When you look at Boston and Milwaukee, those are the teams. I mean, like I love the Knicks. When people look at the Eastern Conference, they're like, all right, it's Milwaukee and Boston. What do you think like about these two teams at this juncture in the season? And like, have they kind of lived up to the bill, or do you feel like there are do you feel like there's too much faith in what Boston has done based on like their regular season record here?
Yeah, it's a layered, complicated question, right?
Yeah, I
So
asked a lot of
I
questions
think
at once.
that, well, I think the answer is it depends on how you're answering it. If I'm answering it just based on this game Wednesday night, I think that we're putting a little too much faith into Boston, to the number on a Wednesday night game, in the middle of March Madness, a month before the end of the season. Looking at the standings right now, Boston has 54 wins. Milwaukee, the 2 seed, has 44. They're 10 games ahead.
Insane.
Like Boston could basically just rest for a month right now and still be the 1 seed. So how do I know Boston's going to show up and be Boston in this game? And in fact, why would Boston show up and be Boston in this game? Why would they show anything to Milwaukee? Why would they put any cards on the table to a team that I have to believe, if you're the Celtics, no matter how up and down and weird the Bucks have been, if I'm the Celtics, that still is the one team that I least want to see in the playoffs. They're the team that in the East, they're the team that I definitely don't want to give anything away to. So who gives a rip if I like give up this game and let them? In fact, all the better. I really don't want Milwaukee dropping to the 4 seed either. So I'd be just fine with them picking up a win here personally. Right? Keep on the other half of the bracket. Like just yeah.
You keep them there because Milwaukee's only 3 losses ahead of the Knicks. The Knicks have 27 losses. They're 4th right now. So it's like why? And I agree with you because Cleveland is 43-25. They're 1 game back of Milwaukee. Like why would you want to see a scenario where you're forcing like Milwaukee down in the bracket where you could see them earlier and then getting like giving New York like a better run, or like the Cavs a better run, like whatever. That's not really a tenable situation. That's not what you want there. I am curious to see like how this kind of comes out because the series has been split this season. Nobody on Boston has played very good in this matchup so far this season. Tatum's been bad. Brown's been bad. Like everybody's been bad. So I'm definitely curious to see, like, is it stylistic? Or is it like a thing where Boston's not really trying to show their hand in terms of like what they're trying to do, or like what they want to, like what the kind of matchups are. But when you're looking at the Eastern Conference, obviously Boston has been incredible. Do you think that there's a team in the East that can really, like, if you had to bet Boston versus the field in the Eastern Conference, would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what number I'm getting. But if you're giving me a head-to-head Boston versus the field, I'm taking the Celtics without even hesitating. Like that,
Yeah.
that's a pretty easy choice. And I mean, I guess we can do that. That's just a Boston to win the East
They're
ticket.
-120. Yeah, they're -120 to
Right.
win the conference. So you're laying a little. You're eating a little bit of juice. It's not even.
Yeah.
Is that like? I think that probably makes the most sense, right?
I mean, it seems like it to me because, like, look, I know this is a New York Knicks podcast. I realize like you're going to sell me on the Knicks. I'll be honest, because I've been buried in NFL and home life stuff. I miss the stretch. I miss like the month of Knicks just like terrorizing the rest of the NFL or the NBA. So I need to see it when like OG gets back and minus Randall. Like I need to see the new version. I just haven't seen it with my own eyes enough to believe yet. I'm just out of options in these. Like unless Embiid comes back, Philly's out. I'm not that worried about Miami. Get out of here with that. I think Boston would have welcomed playing Miami in the first round. Just get them, send them right home. I'm not going to believe in the Cavs. I'm not on the Magic. Like we're just out of options. To me, I still think the Bucks are second by default. I don't really believe in the Bucks that much, but in a series against the Celtics, they're going to have number one, the best player on the court, because that's Giannis.
Yeah.
It's not even close. Get out of here, Jason Tatum. There's no question in my mind he's the best player. I think Dame Lillard is probably still the best, second best player. And guess what? I'm not calling Jaylen Brown the guy I'm comparing him to either. It's probably Porzingis.
Yeah.
But like even like Dame has not been great. But I think in a playoff series, until seen otherwise, I probably still prefer Dame over the other options. So if I have the best player and the best second best player, I have to like my chances. So to me, like, look, Tibbs, Knicks, defense, all that stuff, maybe they can beat the Bucks. That's a different sort of thing to ask against the Celtics, as good as Boston looks. So I think Milwaukee's the only team I can realistically see beating Boston, barring some like huge injuries or wild scenario.
Yeah.
So to me, the question is just, do I believe in Milwaukee enough to wait and not take that Boston field option? And do I think Boston could possibly be tied 1-1 in a series against Milwaukee or even trail 2-1, something like that? Then I should wait and bet Boston later. That to me would be the only reason not to take Boston out of the East right now. Is Milwaukee's the only team I can really get myself talked into.
All right, yeah, I think that that's fair enough. One of the big things that like has been talked about now, like from a storyline perspective, honestly, these games on Wednesday are kind of bad. Like almost every game is a double-digit spread. I'm not even kidding. The only game that's not is the Heat versus the Cavaliers. One play that I am looking for in that game, I'm looking at Jarrett Allen over 11 and a half rebounds. Part of why I like this is that, you know, Bam Adebayo, he's a good rebounder, obviously, but he's not like when he wants to be, almost like it's kind of like a scheme thing. A lot of times it takes him away from the basket. It just is not necessarily a spot that he's grabbing a ton of rebounds. Jared Allen has been dynamic, especially without Evan Mobley. His rebound line here is set at 11 and a half. On the season, that's a line that he's gone over in 47% of games without Evan Mobley. He's averaging 11.8. In the one head-to-head matchup against Miami back in December, he only had 9. But still, in this spot, I do like the 11 and a half rebounds. I think that it's a little bit low. Just stylistically, given what Cleveland is going to be able to do, I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a contested game. Jimmy Butler's on the report as well. That's going to impact not only their offense, but a little bit of their defense, a little bit of that stress on Allen as like that kind of drop defender. So I'm definitely looking at Allen for maybe some rebounds, maybe some RA. You can get his rebounds and assists line at 13 and a half. So I might split between the two of those. You'll see me fire that off probably tomorrow on the Twitter machine and in the Action Network app, but like whatever I decide between the 11 and a half rebounds or the 13 and a half assists. But we will definitely have a play on that on Jarrett Allen in this game. I like the spot. But one of the things that has been talked about since the All-Star break is there's been a lot fewer fouls being called. And the players are playing a lot more physically. I think it's definitely like an interesting thing for a lot of teams, especially teams like New York, right? New York, like the thing is everybody like, and you'll get to find out soon enough, but I saw a tweet, like it was about like a month ago, and it was like everybody's like they're scoring 120 points a game, and they go to New York and it's like they get beat by baseball bats and they score 80. Like, and it's just like that's the way the Knicks play. Like they play very physical. If they can not foul you, like if they're not calling fouls, it dramatically changes the way that teams can defend, right? You can be more physical, you can take more chances with like stopping things or whatever. One of the teams, and I was listening to the Low Post, and they were talking about the Clippers. And they were talking about how the Clippers are a very solid defensive team, specifically because they don't foul. They don't give their opponents those extra opportunities. They don't give them those extra possessions. They don't give them those extra free throws. When they don't, like when you have the scenario now where they're calling fewer fouls, that leverage, that advantage shrinks, right? Do you think that now, like taking that, seeing that the Clippers have kind of struggled lately, can you take that and say like, well, I think maybe they're actually going to struggle in the playoffs too, where that whistle does seem to tighten up a little bit?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to figure out, like with the whistle, with the scoring down, with all the unders that keep hitting. Is that a temporary thing? Is there going to be a reversion, or really is this just playoff basketball? Like, did we revert early to the playoff whistle that we all know usually comes when we get there? We all know, like, okay, well, the Trey Youngs of the world are gonna stop getting their like 6 freebie free throws every
Yeah.
time, and so I think actually that seems like the Occam's razor answer here is what we're seeing right now, what we're seeing this month or two of games, and with the scoring down and the fouls down, that's kind of what happens in the playoffs, right? Like that, the slower tempo, the less scoring, less fouls, less freebies, and easy stuff. That's sort of like what we see when we get to the playoffs. You got to earn it, right? Like all the stereotype stuff that we say in the playoffs, that's what we're seeing right now. So I think you have to take what you're seeing in front of you and apply it. Like when you see a team like the Clippers shrink a little bit and that foul advantage isn't there, like I'm a big 4 factors guy. Fouling, free throws, that's one of the 4 factors. If there was suddenly a rule change that took away rebounding somehow, if there was
Yeah.
like a way that like not took it away, but just like somehow rebounding advantages or disadvantages that teams had or didn't have disappeared for the most part, or it shrunk the gap a lot, would you change the way you thought about teams? I sure hope
Yeah.
so. I sure hope so, because rebounding matters a lot. And like, look, we saw the Knicks and the Cavs series last year. Your Knicks pounded the offensive glass and won an entire playoff series because of offensive rebounding. So if you take
Yeah.
that advantage away, what changes? The whole series, the entire
Everything.
cap.
Yeah.
So I think free throws you have to treat similarly. And like some of the guys like Luka, like Shea, that we might have thought would fall down the ranks without the free throw grifting, turns out they're not. Turns out they're just pretty good players. They can still get their points other ways. I think that matters too. I think that should give us confidence. You should have had confidence in Luka. He's been incredible in the playoffs his whole career. But I think it should give us confidence on Shea that he
Yeah.
really is this good. He really is ready for the prime time for these playoff moments, even with a tighter whistle. So I think what we're seeing right now, we shouldn't take with a grain of salt. I think we should be projecting it forward as something that really matters.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that you bring up Shea, for example, right? Like before the All-Star break, Shea was averaging about 9 free throws a game. After the All-Star break, he's averaging about 8 free throws a game. The difference in his points per game is from 31 to 30. Like it's literally the one free throw. So I think that that's like kind of like a funny like kind of like comparison. And then even with Luka, Luka is a guy where, you know, he's been just he can score just in so many different ways. And I think that that's the thing. Like he can kind of embrace that physical style of basketball. But I think the fact that like a team like Oklahoma City, where we had these concerns, we were like, can they really kind of keep it together? Their offensive rating on the whole season is a 119. Post All-Star break, their offensive rating is 118.3. So it's like it's not really changed whatsoever. And they have a plus 8.7 net rating, which is one of the best in the league. It's actually 4th best after the Pelicans, the Nuggets, and the Celtics. So maybe there is like a little bit more to this Oklahoma City team. Whereas when we look at some of these teams that are struggling, like Philly's obviously struggling, Chicago's struggling, but the Clippers are minus 2.1. That's 20th in net rating. Granted, they've had some injuries, like whatever, but they've really struggled. The Cavs have struggled. They're minus 1.5. Phoenix minus 1. It definitely kind of creates like a little bit of a pressure point now where it's like maybe we are getting a little bit of a look at playoff basketball earlier than we thought we were really going to. And I think it's not noise right now. I think that we need to take this as an opportunity to say, like, we're really learning something about these teams. Can they get it done in the postseason? When you're looking at this season so far, I know like you've been busy with NFL, NCAA, like everything, right? Like literally just everything, family, whatever. Like literally,
Yeah.
when you're looking at where we are in the standings, what we're looking at so far this season, what is like the one thing that you're most surprised about, and what is the one thing that you are least surprised about? And you're like, no, that is exactly how we thought. And don't talk about the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, we don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about the Grizzlies. That has not gone well for all of those picks. That honestly, if we magically made all of our content at tip off on opening night, we would have already been out on them then.
Yeah,
So it happens. The injuries and the Steven Adams and John, everything happens. I think the Lakers and Suns are exactly what I thought that they would be.
yeah,
The Lakers and Suns were both teams I picked to miss the playoffs. I think there's a good chance at least one of those bets cashes. I think there's a chance they both cash at this point. They're just not great teams. Like part of it is that the West is really good. If the Lakers and Suns were in the East, they'd be much better.
yeah,
They'd be probably in the 4 or 5 seed sort of range. I think that would be fair, but they're not. And we knew that before the season. They don't have depth. They don't have the right pieces around. The Suns guys not fitting together hasn't really surprised anyone. And frankly, Yusuf Nurkic has been way better than I thought he would be. And they still are like a pretty mid team. And frankly, Anthony Davis has been way healthier than I thought he might be. And they're still a pretty mid team. Like they're just not that great. And I don't really like, we keep treating them like the Lakers and like the Suns, like the teams that have these high odds. That's how the betting market keeps treating them. And it's LeBron and it's Durant. And frankly, if I'm being totally fair to the thing I'm saying, it's Steph and the Warriors. They really should be in the same conversation, even though it hurts my soul to admit it. They're just not that great. Like I think time has passed them by, and we're gonna all get super excited a month from right now to watch those teams in the play-in and be like, oh no, the Thunder have to. Oh, they got the 1 seed and now they have to play the Lakers or the Suns. Guess what? The Thunder are way better than those teams. We have 82 games telling us that they're way better. So, yeah, to me, that's the thing. I'm not surprised by that. And I guess just the Eastern standings effectively about what I would have expected. The thing I'm surprised by, and just you were just talking about them, and I guess I just was too, I need to get your opinion on the Thunder because, man, I was really mostly out on the Thunder before the season. I thought they'd be a play-in-ish type team. I have a thing I talk about just how I would say growth is not linear. And I thought that this would be a season to figure stuff out. What I did not think is that Chet would be this good as a rookie. Like he's having an all-time rookie season. Doesn't matter because Victor Wembanyama is the alien freak and he's the real answer to all the stuff I'm saying. Like he's the only player I want to watch in basketball right now until we can't anymore because of the playoffs. Like he's the real thing. I could have a whole podcast about him. It's absurd. Chet is having a crazy good rookie season. He's making a huge impact defensively. He is absolutely a 16 gamer. He's going to show up in the playoffs. He's going to rotate. He's going to play defense on the perimeter. He's going to block shots at the rim. He's going to, when Josh Giddey inevitably gets played off the court, be able to do some of the Giddey stuff. He's going to be able to handle a little more. He can bring the ball up. He can pass a little bit. He can do more things than he's even been doing. I liked all that about Chet early. I didn't think his body would be ready. He's ready. He's here. He's awesome. I didn't think Jalen Williams would be this good. And I honestly think Jalen Williams would ever be this good of a shooter. He's awesome. He is a borderline all-star right now.
Really
and I didn't think Shea would be a top 3 player. And every metric we have says he's right there, says that he is deserving of being in the MVP conversation at the top of the list. I still pick Jokic personally, but I think Shea is right there. I didn't think any of those 3 guys would be that good this fast. I honestly think, based on everything I've seen from watching parts of them and just from all the numbers that we have, I think people still somehow are sleeping on the Thunder, and I don't understand it. I know Boston is the favorite. I know Denver is Denver. I think Oklahoma City is very clearly the next team after those 2, and we're not treating them that way. It's like, well, I don't know. If it's not Denver in the West, who could it be? I don't know. Maybe the Lakers, or I like the Pelicans this week. Maybe the Clippers are good. I got my Timberwolves tickets still, even though we all know they're going to lose in the first round. Hooray for my Timberwolves. The Thunder are really good. What's happening? Why are the Thunder this good, Joe?
So, I mean, I think we touched on it before. It's like Shea kind of really took a step up, and all of these players took a step up. And it's part of why I gave out that bet a couple weeks ago where I said, division of the NBA championship winner. You can still bet this. It's still plus 300 on Bet365.
Love
And
that.
the Atlantic division is still plus 225. You can bet the Atlantic and the Northwest. That means you get the Celtics, the Knicks, the Sixers, the Nuggets, the Thunder, and the Timberwolves for like a roughly combined price of about minus 125 versus the field. I still think you should be betting this, especially now. I think like there's even particular value on the number one. There's value on Atlantic because the plus 225 is literally the Celtics odds. It's just you're getting
Right.
two free teams. The
Yep.
Northwest, it's actually almost the Nuggets odds. Like you're almost getting the Thunder for free.
Which is
And
insane.
the Timberwolves, you're almost getting them for free. It's insane.
It's
So
crazy.
when you can do that, like when you look at it that way, it just doesn't make any sense, right? So especially now, given what we've kind of seen from the Clippers, I like the Pelicans have looked good, but there's some crazy numbers out there for them. Like you could bet them if you want to. Either way, I think what's going on with Oklahoma City is they are really good. I think the point that you're making too about how good Chet is like really important. He's really good, but I think part of the thing is people are like, oh, like his EPM is so good, whatever. Like it's like you're playing on like a really good team, like it's gonna be better, right? But what he can do is he like is very particularly like he helps optimize what the Thunder want to do. The
Yep.
Thunder and that's one of the most important things. Like it's like when you add different players that are like the same, right? Like it's like if you put like what the Phoenix Suns did where you add like Booker, Durant and Beal, like all the same team. It's like you start getting like diminishing returns on just exactly what you're getting, right? When you added Chet to what Oklahoma City wants to do, they immediately became like unlocked in so many different ways because Chet is a guy that can not only bring the ball up, but he's also like a lot of times what people want to see is like you see like the Nuggets do it where Jokic brings the ball up and it fucks with the spacing of the other team because like while he can shoot threes, it's not really what his thing is, right? Oklahoma City, because they have a guy that's a stretch five in Chet who can shoot threes, you can actually put him in the corner where it's like instead of your center bringing the ball up, you have Josh Giddey bringing the ball up because he's not the fucking shooting threat, so it's like you can space the floor in different ways. And what Chet allows you to do is it helps open up the offense. He can play off of screens, he can do things defensively. And people keep saying it was like, oh, like Oklahoma City needs to get a big, they need like a bigger body, they got to play with Jokic, they need to do this, they got to play with Gobert. No, they don't. Like this is what works for them. And like this is your proof of concept, and like we're gonna run with our theory of what works versus your
Yep.
theory of what works. And if we are trying to beat you at your game, well, we're not gonna beat Jokic. Let me tell you, it's not gonna happen. Like you're not gonna put a better Jokic on the floor, but maybe you can do something different that messes
Yeah.
up what Denver wants to do. And that's why I think Oklahoma City is so dangerous because they are specifically different. I think Minnesota is a very tough matchup for Denver, specifically because of the bigs, and like it's a hard matchup for them because you have so many guards you can throw on Murray. You have so many guards that you can throw on, on the perimeter for Denver and stress that. And then you have Gobert, who's just like a brick wall. So it's hard for Jokic, even though Jokic dominates like he does in pretty much every matchup, but it's a harder matchup. So that's what makes Minnesota difficult. But Oklahoma City can do something different that stylistically, maybe in a playoff series, Denver goes, oh, we don't really have a good counter for this. We're going to have to try to do something different to make you guys change what you're doing. So I think that's why Oklahoma City has a lot of value, and they're still just being undersold in the market. Number one, because of Denver, but then number two, because they are young. They haven't been playoff tested. And I think that people are saying like, oh, well, like Shea's free throws are going to dry up. They're not drying up, guys. Like he's still taking 8 a game, and he was averaging 9 pre-break. Like that's not drying up, and the whistle has gotten significantly tighter. So I do like this play, and I would just bet it this way. I think that you could get an Oklahoma City ticket if you want one, if you haven't had one. I'm riding 130-1 ticket that we talked about in the summer. So I'm
Let's
pretty
go.
comfortable with my Oklahoma City position. But that's just kind of my thoughts on what's going on in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I think too, as you were saying it, the thing that kind of clicked in my head is one of the biggest reasons that I was not in on Oklahoma City coming into the year is because I didn't think Chet was ready. Like I explained that I didn't think his body would be ready because I didn't think even in summer league last year. I know summer league shouldn't matter. Summer league matters a little bit. You see kind of what teams are trying to have guys do in their roles. They didn't have Chet Holmgren playing center. They had him playing like a stretch four, and I was like, all right, well, that's a bummer and that's disappointing, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the Evan Mobley, right? Like he's not ready yet to be a center. Evan Mobley is going to be a center eventually. It's what's going to make him great and super valuable. He's not quite as valuable as he can be without that. And Evan Mobley can't stretch and shoot. Chet Holmgren is there. Look, we saw with Wembanyama this year. As soon as they moved him to the 5, even though he wasn't necessarily physically ready against like Jokic or Embiid, guess what? Nobody is. No one is physically ready against those guys. It's fine. But look how Wembanyama's numbers exploded. Look how things opened up. Look how their defense got better with him on the court. And look how much better the offense is. Guess what? Chet playing the 5 and playing this well, and Jalen Williams shooting this well is directly correlated to why Shea is having this breakout, even more breakout season and being an MVP candidate. Because guess what? The court's wide open because you don't have Mike Muscala underneath the basket eating up space so that Chet doesn't take an elbow. He's not on the court. Chet is out on the perimeter and there's nobody in the paint. Your center's got to be out here on the perimeter guarding someone. And now Shea just gets to like slice and dice, pick and roll, read the defense, get to the rim, do all the stuff he wants because you don't have a defense that can answer to it because of Oklahoma City style, because Chet is out there and they can play 5 out that way. Well, once they get Giddey out of the playoff rotation, they can. Yeah. We'll get that. That's really, Josh Giddey is their center, really. And that's going to be its own thing they're going to have to figure out. But to me, it's the whole thing. It's the conjunction of playing those guys together that makes them potentially special. I think Oklahoma City knew that's where they're going to get to. I didn't think they would get there this fast with Chet at the 5, but I think that is what's opened up everything else. And I think it's what they need to stick with. And I don't know, can they be the Nuggets? The Nuggets just won a championship. If you're saying, well, this can't work because it can't be the Nuggets, this is a pretty high standard. It can't work because it can't be the Celtics. All right, great. A lot of teams can't be the Celtics. Nobody can be the Celtics. They're crushing everyone. They're like one of the greatest regular season profiles of all time. The Thunder are the second best regular season team by every profile right now. They have an MVP candidate. They have 2 All-Stars. They have pretty good depth. They have some options when they get to the playoffs. I like guys like Isaiah Joe, some of the shooters they have. They got some wings they can bring in. No, they don't have a classical center that they can put in there and play that way. But guess what? All the other teams don't have a Chet that they can put in and play that way either. So I think that, yeah, Oklahoma City to me just seems undervalued. I still think Boston and Denver are the 2 right teams, but stuff happens. And if it's not one of those teams, I don't know, it'd be pretty weird if a young team like OKC won it all, but it'd be pretty weird if the Cavs won it all or the Timberwolves won it all or the Clippers. Like, it'd be weird if all these teams do. But if you're telling me it's not Denver or Boston, it has to be someone else. I think Oklahoma City is the most likely someone else right now. I think they're a great team, and I did not see this coming this quickly this season.
Yeah, no, it's been an incredible run for them. And I think Sam Presti was not sure if this was going to happen, but now it definitely gives them more room, more moves that they can make this coming offseason. But with that, Brandon, it was a pleasure, obviously, having you on. We kind of did go a little bit long on this, but it's just more. It's just more stuff for you guys to listen to. And obviously, once again, this episode is brought to you by our good friends at Props.Cash. You can get the second half NBA pass and the college basketball player pass through the second half of the season. That includes all of the playoffs with code CashThatNBA for that nice price of $69. So Brandon, obviously pleasure to have you on. Thank you for coming on. We'll look out for your picks. Make sure you guys keep filling out your brackets, and let's continue to cash that.